welcome. You're watching Newsx and I'm Megha Sharma. The Indian-American scientist Dr. Bhattacharya has been confirmed as the director of America's National Institute of Health. The Kolkata-born doctor replaces the controversial Dr. Anthony Fauci, who led the NIH for 40 years and was accused of covering up the COVID China lab leak allegations. Dr. Bhattacharya was born in Kolkata and is also an investigator. Stanford had opposed the lockdowns and masks imposed as part of the COVID pandemic. He also co-authored the Great Barrington Declaration by advocating an alternative approach to COVID-19 through focused protection. His predecessor, Fauci, through leaked emails and chats, was accused of hiding crucial COVID-19 information. The NIH also in 2014, under Fauci's tenure, gave the Wuhan Institute funding through an organization called EcoHealth, which Fauci categorically denied. All right, it is going to be an interesting that Dr. Bhattacharya has replaced Fauci as the head of the NIH, and if that is going to be the precedent that is going to be set by the Trump administration, what action or what investigations and probes are going to be initiated by the director or by the new director of the NIH against Fauci is something that could be speculated, and we'll try to figure that answer out with our panelists. I have with me Ambassador Pradeep Goyal. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Thank you so much, Ambassador Kapoor, for joining me on this show. And your first reactions when Dr. Bhattacharya was appointed as the NIH director by the Trump administration. What is it? How is it going to impact the NIH and the medical services sector in the country?
Thank you, Megha. I think it's a very good move because a very large number of physicians in the US are of Bharatiya origin. Some say it's almost 28% to 29%. So with such a significant presence of doctors from India, from Bharat in the US, they are playing a very important role. Then there are some organizations like FIPA and API, which are physicians organizations, which are very prominent in the US and contributing very significantly to the healthcare sector, to the medical sector, to the advances in this sector. So to appoint an Indian origin person, Dr. Bhattacharya, who is himself a very reputed individual, who's done very good work, to the head of the NIH. NIH does very pioneering work, and it has very outstanding and very eminent physicians all over the country and in other countries also. So to have Dr. Bhattacharya now heading that organization with a big budget is a very important forward step. I think he has said very clearly that he will take science forward in a positive manner, and he will also sort of want critiques and accept critiques of various policies and various steps being taken, and various formulations, various advances, so that he will approach all this with an open mind. Now that's also a very good step. He had been opposed to certain aspects of the COVID protocols and the COVID regimes, which he had articulated very clearly during even in the time when the Great Barrington Declaration was put forth. So he has his views on that, and that has ultimately proved to be, sort of correct in many ways also. So he will be firm about that aspect. I also wish that he will go in, the path of exploration of how COVID started, so that the controversy is put aside once and for all, that where it started, how it started, who engineered it, who spread it around in the world, because that also needs to be brought to a closure. WHO has been very cagey about it, and it needs now to be brought into the open. So I hope he does that also. But I think overall, it's very good for the Trump administration and for the presence and contribution by the Indian diaspora in the US. Back to you, Megha.
I'm going to quickly get in Padma Shri Dr. Sanjeev Bagai into the conversation as well. Dr. Bagai, what makes this appointment a little controversial over here is the fact that Dr. Jay was a vehement critic of the NIH that was at one point of time under Biden administration being run by Dr. Anthony Fauci. He was extremely critical and against a number of measures and actions that had been taken up by the Biden administration, by Dr. Fauci in fighting COVID. And questions were also raised about the involvement of Anthony Fauci and the NIH in helping the cause of the Wuhan lab in being able to then quote unquote breed this COVID virus and spread it across the globe. What is going to be the impact of it now that Dr. J himself is at the helm of affairs at the NIH?
Okay, so good evening everyone. 5 years of discussion in a couple of minutes. So it's going to be full steam on. So I think many self-crowned princes and princes have fallen during COVID in terms of their assessments. So COVID has been a learning lesson for many people. For him to have said that let's go for herd immunity is nothing short of being disastrous. For him to have said masks are not required is nothing but naive and immature. For him to have said that vaccines are not important, let's wait for the community to develop immunity, what we call as community acquired immunity or herd immunity, is just plain simple foolish. Leaving the COVID, his COVID assessment, which has fallen flat, apart, I think his overall demeanor is going to be shown on three different fronts. One is his own intellectual skills and his research capability. Point number two, he is able to liaison with a large section of doctors and researchers and scientists in US and outside US, that's globally. And three is, how strong is he to try to find out something about the origin of COVID? Let's address all three together. Point number one, what is his capability and strength as a researcher, as a scientist, as a doctor? I think much will depend upon what kind of role he plays in pushing newer technology, innovations, what is going to be the new format of the WHO without the presence of US? Is there going to be another world body? What kind of changes are required in WHO, which are overdue and long overdue? Overall, WHO has really been now a defunct body. Point number two is, how is he going to liaison with a lot of doctors in US, Indian origin and American or native or globally? I think his mettle is still to be proven as far as that is concerned. And the last is, if anyone feels in this world that 5 years later you're going to find evidence, that also from China, and that's a classical case of Alice in Wonderland. You're going to find nothing. And for us to hope after 5 years that either the US or China is going to come clean with it, that's not going to happen. It's being foolhardy to expect that. I think we need to move on beyond the origins of COVID. We wasted far too much of time to expect China to come out clean. Now, whether it came from the lab or whether it was a flesh market or a meat market or whether it was a deliberate or non-deliberate, these are bygones. The fact is, what are we going to do to contain these kind of irregularities inside China? That's really where this new appointee is going to be tested. But I think it's interesting times ahead, how we are going to shape the world in terms of technology, innovation, research, newer fronts like mRNA, nanotechnology, AI in healthcare, genomics. So it's interesting for him. I'm sure he has his hands full. And probably he'll learn not to shoot out his mouth too early, too fast, too soon. Over to you.
Okay. That's an interesting analysis. And Dr. P.S.V. Rao, do you feel the same about what Dr. Bagai has said, that reopening of COVID files is not really going to do anybody any good if we are going to be, if we are pinning our hopes on Dr. J. Bhattacharya to zero in on the origin of the virus and make China responsible, accountable and pay for the COVID pandemic that spread across the globe, that killed hundreds and thousands and millions of people. Is there still a glimmer of hope that justice could be done?
Good evening, Megha and panelists and all the viewers. See, I was intensely involved in investigating the origins of it because if you remember that time, I had repeatedly said that China is not going to allow you to do any kind of investigation. But much before they clamped down on all the information, there was enough scientific information which had been published by the Chinese themselves, which was all indicating what they had done. Also, on their website, before it was pulled down, there was all the details of who had funded, including the NIH and the Eco Alliance. So this was also there. Then the patents that the Chinese army had taken, and about how to take care of bats, how to feed them, because no zoo anywhere in the world had succeeded in keeping bats in captivity. And the first patent for vaccine was for a Chinese vaccine was applied for by the Chinese military in the third week of January of 2020. So all these facts were already available, proved because they had themselves done it, and I had put it out in the Sunday Guardian, and I had also mentioned it. One other thing, it became very obvious very soon that Anthony Fauci and his people were involved in suppressing the whole thing. See, if the Chinese were alone, then they may not have succeeded to the extent they succeeded in suppressing everything, because the Americans were themselves involved. And what is the proof that they were involved? One, the IIT Delhi people who in the third week of January of 2020 put out the genetic code and showed that some of them were outside insertions. They were not coronavirus genes, they were genes from other viruses, especially the virus, the insertion which made it possible for this virus to attack human beings. This had to be, the moment they put it up, Anthony Fauci was himself, at least the person identified himself as Anthony Fauci, who rang up these virologists in IIT Delhi and threatened them with dire consequences. And this is why these, because I was talking about it and I am a surgeon, not a virologist, these people contacted me and gave me all the information. They said Anthony Fauci has threatened us that because he could, that he will throw us out of IIT and take a lot of action. So they pleaded with me. They said, we can't go to the, we have withdrawn our publication, but here is our publication. Here are all the details. And this is how, this is also helped. Then the other thing that came out soon was the fact that Anthony Fauci and his people in the Eco Alliance went around putting gathering a whole lot of virologists to put out an article saying that all those of us who are saying it is from a lab leak are all conspiracy theorists. And this also finally came out that he is the one who had got this group to publish in a scientific journal. So what it came out was very obvious that the Chinese had done it, and and in the Wuhan it had leaked out, and there was also a survey by the Chinese themselves just before the pandemic started, which showed that no bat was on sale in the Wuhan market. But there is a whole list of endangered species which were being sold in the Wuhan market. I had put out that study also into the thing. Plus the fact that they had gone around collecting viruses from around the world, especially including in India, where without any government's permission, they had come and collected bats and the viruses from the bats and then published it in a scientific journal. So with all this information, it was very obvious that Fauci and his team were itself suppressing it. So I hope now that Bhattacharya will be far more successful in exposing what is already available in US itself. Forget about what's happening in China.
Okay.
It is Americans who funded it and did all this.
Okay. Sumit, I'm going to come to you. Now, what are your inferences from the appointment that has been made? Another Indian origin American who is at the helm of affairs of a very important institution, the National Institute here, talking about the National Institute of Health. The situation where the focal point of who Jay Bhattacharya is directly linked to his heavy criticism for the Biden administration and Anthony Fauci particularly over their management of the COVID pandemic that spread in America. How do you see him taking forward the cause of President Trump, who was anti-vaccine, anti-masks, anti-lockdowns? And do you think in the future there are going to be more investigations that are going to be opened up here?
Megha, thank you very much for having me on your show. A couple of things I want to put in perspective first. Look, if you look at the whole picture today with the changing geopolitical situations and the threats and the vested interest groups and deep state coming and doing the dance in public, you need a person who is more of an administrator than a doctor here. It's not important how good or bad your doctor are. Look at their defense secretary. It has nothing to do with defense. Now, look, today you need a person who can handle the threats which are prevalent in the society and in the world. There's no WHO, what Dr. Bagai rightly said. The second thing is there are still so many labs like Wuhan which are functional in China. It's also documented fact, NIH and Fauci provided money to them. There are labs which are functional in Ukraine, by the way. There are 5 labs which are functional in Ukraine, and it is believed to be there might be labs which may be other parts of the world which may or may not be funded by the Americans. So Fauci was the czar of this world. He was the don of this world, if I may use the word don, because you have been there for 40 years and you are running your billions and trillions of dollars. You are doing whatever you want to do. And let me also tell you, there's a group of people in America, including some members of the deep state, who believe in the big reset. They believe that this earth cannot handle 8 billion people. If 1 or 2 billion need to die so that the earth becomes more cozy and our riches and our lives can continue. There are people who wanted a reset. And there are doctors in America who wanted to sell a shot for $200 per vaccine. We have done programs on Newsx. I mean, I can't remember their names now, but there were videos out there who wanted to sell this. So whatever happened as a pandemic is a colossal failure of Biden administration and Fauci as a person who was heading it. Americans were hand and glove into it. Only thing is it was done in China. The Chinese Communist Party used this against them at the right point of time. And I mean, look, there was an investigation ordered by Biden. And we were told within 3 months we'll get the report. Then when report came after 2 years, China, Wuhan, and the leave all was listening in it. Matlab, you ordered the cheese, you ordered the pizza, what you say the base is missing only your vegetables and some cheese dips around. That is what came in the report. And it is believed that there were people so powerful who could manage to take out China, Wuhan, and the lab leak and the gain of function from it. Remember last time when Trump was the president, Fauci was standing next to him. I remember those peak of COVID days. You could see there was no chemistry between them. You could see there were disagreements between them. You could see they were not talking to each other. There was a, North and South Pole apart. Now, with these challenges happening in the world, another reason for having an Indian origin doctor is like 28% of physicians are Indian origin. One. Second thing is, where does the medicine in America come from? 30% of the dawaiyan jo jati, Bharat se jati hai. 30% of the medicines come from India. And the number one killing disease in America is cardiovascular disease. Where do 40 to 50% of the medicines come from India? Where do 50% of the generic medicines in America come from India? India exports medicines to 203 countries, and America is the biggest market with around 30% of the market share, which is today controlled by Indian medicine. So when you talk about affordability of the medicines in America, still people are able to afford medicines. A common man is because the medicines are coming from India. So if you have to really build this ecosystem and make medicine available for the common people, look at how to get this insurance and all that. And the COVID also broke one myth. The myth was that American healthcare is most advanced. Look at their population to death ratio and look at our population to death ratio. I'm not counting dead. I should not be counting dead. But when we are doing a debate, we have to look at this. We were written off. But look, how did we manage and how did they manage? Look at cost of our vaccine. Look at the cost of their vaccine. Look how many people did we inoculate with all the problems.
If Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was to be the NIH director back in the time, he would have definitely he would have not propagated and advocated lockdowns. He would have said, don't wear masks. He would have said, don't take the vaccines. And how would the world have taken to that? Would you think more American deaths would have been caused because of it?
You see, it's not a question of what does a person think. You have to go for scientific logic. I might believe I don't need a mask, or I believe you might not. That's not what the logic is. The logic is there's a much bigger clutter which is in America. There's a mucch bigger, undercurrents you are working in America. You see, pharma is controls around 7% of the global GDP with a growth of 16, 17%. It's a big industry, and affordability and right to live is for everybody. COVID is not the last. With so many viruses which are still bred in China, and these labs happening in the world, I think the job of Dr. Bhattacharya should be how to prevent these disasters from happening. It's not important what Dr. Bagai said, what do I think or believe or what a subject. It is how do you prevent such things? How do you make medicine affordable? How is the world gearing for a new pandemic? How will the vaccines be ramped up? And how do we make sure the life and economy both go simultaneously? We cannot suppress life over economy and economy over life. Both have to be managed successfully with these challenges. This is the job of the man.
Okay, I'm going to quickly get in Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor back into the conversation. A very short comment before I wrap this up. I have very little time, sir. Again, how does a director of the NIH ensure that he has a legacy of 40 years? How does the NIH system function for a director to be appointed and then reappointed for a period of 4 decades?
So, Megha, thank you for that question. It's not going to be an easy task in the sense that there is a lot of deep state involvement, there's a lot of murkiness, and those who ignore history are, sort of condemned to repeat it themselves. So, if you don't understand the origins of the virus, for preventing future such viruses coming into play is very difficult. So it's very essential, and there's enough trace available, like Dr. Venkatesh also mentioned, that it's very easy to trace out the origin, provided you have a serious purpose and serious intent. So to get those medical documentation and find out how it happened, what was the Chinese involvement, what was the Chinese military involvement, what was the Chinese government involvement, what was the American involvement, because there was American financial involvement in that whole research. So how to deal with that and how to make sure that it does not happen again is very, very important. If you have to leave your legacy, healthcare costs in the US per capita today are the highest in the world. Healthcare quality delivery is not comparable to the cost. Now, to make it sort of commensurate with the cost, how do you move in a way that the cost come down and the quality of the delivery goes up? So those sort of questions are very important, and NIH is the nodal agency for delivery of healthcare in the USA and for leading research on healthcare. Now, having sort of, unified healthcare, having healthcare which is also involves natural healthcare, Ayurvedic healthcare, homeopathic healthcare, how do you bring that into the mainstream is also going to be an important aspect, because once you have those aspects incorporated like Ayush, it will impact your wellness also, because you're not just dealing with treatment of disease. You're trying to create a healthy lifestyle. You're trying to create wellness so that you are able to preempt and prevent the frequent occurrence and the massive occurrence of disease. So all those steps will also be very important for Dr. Bhattacharya if he has to create a legacy and leave behind a legacy where he is able to take American healthcare into the future, into the digital age, into making it affordable, into democratizing it, so that everybody is able to afford it and access it. So that is where his challenges lie. Back to you, Megha.
Okay, all right. On that note, I'm out of time. I thank all of you, my panelists, for joining me on the telecast and sharing your views. On that note, I slip into a short break. Thanks for watching Newsx.